Hey, this week Valve is about to snap. FlatHub makes a strategic shift. We have news about the Pi 5, about the OpenWRT 1, and a very weird letter gets sent to the Linux kernel mailing list, sort of like from 2006. It's weird and wonderful. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 135, recorded Saturday, January 20th. Dark Kernel Lore.
This show is brought to you by members like you. Thanks.
Hey, welcome. It is Saturday, and you know what that means. It's time for Linux. It's time for some geekiness and some goodness. It's all the news. It's everything you want to know. And of course, not just me. I have a cadre of co-hosts with me. Hey, guys, welcome.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Yes. Rob goes first, and we were commenting before the show that Rob is in something of a fighting mood, we think, because Rob wants to talk about snaps, and then Rob wants to talk about Wayland. It's going to be a knockdown, drag-out sort of day, I think. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll see if Ken can make it through the whole show. So, issues with Canonical's favorite homegrown package manager is enough to make one Valve engineer snap. One of Valve's software engineers, Timothy Bassett, took to Mastodon this week to vent about issues with Canonical's snapped version of the Steam client and what it is causing, the issues it is causing for Valve and their users. The problem for Valve is that the snap of the Steam client is leading to bug reports that don't affect regularly native installs of the Steam client. So the issue is that Valve is getting these bug reports for issues only affecting the snapped version of the Steam client. And there's nothing that Valve can do about it. A quote from Timothy states, quote, "We are not involved with the snap repackaging. It has a lot of issues, noting that the best way to install Steam on Debian and derivative operating systems is to use ... use the official deb." I think some things were censored out of there. I should have went to find the actual Mastodon post, but I couldn't say here anyway. So, and as others point out, if the bug is with the snap package system and not Steam client itself, then these bugs, they need to be reported to Canonical, not Steam, because Canonical's the ones who can do something about it. Things, I understand, things are going to have bugs. And some of the commenters also have pointed out, bugs like these are going to probably hit like Flatpak, maybe not the same bugs, but you're probably going to have bugs like in the Flatpak version and wherever else of the Steam client, similar issues, but maybe we're not seeing them. Maybe Valve isn't seeing them due to just the smaller user base, because Ubuntu and Canonical users are really pushed towards that snap these days. Maybe not. But the fact of this story is that they are seeing these bugs with the snap version. It's causing them headaches. Other points brought up is that it isn't necessarily clear to the user that they are running an unofficial repackaged version of the Steam client. So, maybe if Canonical, maybe if they repackaged it, they bundled in support somehow that people knew that they're getting the snap and knew that, hey, this is snap package, it's unofficial. If I have a problem, I probably need to get to Canonical first, provide these support methods within the snap interface or something. So they go to the right teams. That might, help that situation out instead of, again, these reports to Valve who can't do anything. Timothy went as far to suggest that, if this starts to get really bad, they may have to start popping up a warning, letting users know they're running an unofficial third-party packaged version of the Steam client. So, it's causing them headaches. We've heard users complain about it. Now we got developers. It's Someday it'll be there. But
I will tell you the thing that strikes me as weird about this one, and that is that Canonical is taking Valve's work and repackaging it as a snap. I think that's probably the big problem here, as opposed to Valve doing that officially. And I get why Canonical wants to, because you have all these people that Valve is not terribly interested in a snap, and Canonical really wants all these things to be available as snaps. But you're going to have a quality control issue if the people that really understand that particular piece of software are not the ones that are doing the snap. So it's kind of a catch-22 for Canonical.
Well, you've got three options for getting it. You've got the snap that we're discussing, the actual deb file that you can download, and then there's a Flatpak version.
Is the Flatpak official?
Unofficial.
Yeah.
But the Flatpak says that when it brings it up.
Yeah, you got other versions, but also I'm assuming, I haven't used a desktop version of Ubuntu for a little bit. I'm assuming that when you bring up that software center, if you search Steam, I'm assuming the default that it pushes you to is Snap, just because that's kind of what they're really pushing everything to.
Yeah, I don't have an Ubuntu install around to try. I do see on the Snapcraft store, it does specify this package is maintained by Canonical and is not officially supported by Valve. Please report any issues through the contact or website links. So they are trying to not spam Valve with Snap-related problems.
Yeah, if they could somehow get that into the interface, maybe it'd be better. But people don't look. They find Steam, they hit install, and they're not going to read that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, am I using the Steam Snap or the deb version of Steam?
Well, do you have any problems?
It depends on the game.
But
I still have not been able to get Civilization 6 to run.
I'm not sure that's a Steam problem so much as a Civ problem.
Yeah. Well, we haven't heard back if Canonical is going to say anything, but maybe in a follow-up article next week we'll hear about how Canonical snaps back.
Well, staying on the topic of applications that are being bundled, let's chat about FlatHub for a minute. And Ken's got this story with a shift at FlatHub. Ken, what's going on?
Yes, we're actually hearing about this from Bobby Borisov, who's writing for Linux EEC. The FlatHub success. Excuse me. That FlatHub's success in reaching 1 billion downloads of their over 2,400 applications may have brought its own challenges, particularly concerning the quality of app metadata. FlatHub noticed an influx of applications with low-quality metadata, unappealing icons, and outdated screenshots, which may lead to confusion amongst users. FlatHub's devs have taken a two-pronged approach for improving this situation. First, raise the standard for app metadata across all applications. And second, introduce a curation system to highlight the best apps. FlatHub has introduced detailed documentation for app metadata and a new review system allowing editors to rate each app's metadata. Developers can see these ratings and make necessary improvements in subsequent releases. FlatHub can then curate high-quality apps with excellent metadata. Do any of you think this will improve search capabilities and enhance the overall discoverability and attractiveness of apps on FlatHub?
So, first off, I did not realize that there were only 2,400 apps on FlatHub. That is lower than I expected, knowing, on some of the other repos, how many apps or packages or libraries there are. 2,400 seems like a very low number.
That's the number that Bobby said, and I know it's over that. He actually says that it's over 2,400.
Yeah, so But
I haven't.
on the topic of curation and cleaning up the metadata, I like the idea because I feel like what that's going to do is the actual well-built apps, particularly those that are official, are going to show up better. It's going to make it a little harder for, your garden variety spammers to put my first app up there that's just going to try to mine Bitcoin or what have you. It'll raise the bar a little bit, I think. And so sounds like a good thing to me.
You know what's going to even help better once they get AI in there.
So I am normally very skeptical of AI, but one of the few places where it does make sense is doing something like a initial screening of, hey, something in this app's source looks really weird. Maybe a human should come take a look at it. That's one of those. It's one of those few places where, like an LLM or machine learning, actually can make sense. It's not ever going to be perfect, but it could be a useful tool.
And if you're talking about just finding things, though, too, searchability or findability, like was mentioned, it's great for finding the right stuff quite often, too.
Yep, indeed. That's true. That is true. Okay. I've got some news. I've got 2 bits of news that I'm going to put together here because they are both about embedded devices. And first off is about the Raspberry Pi 5. And so I've got a link here to a quick interview in Vegas at CES 2024 between Jeff Geerling and Eben Upton. And they top comment, bro, I thought that was Jason Statham. If you've never seen the two of them, Eben Upton sort of looks like the UK version of Jason Statham. It's sort of a joke that apparently he gets a lot of people, but they look alike. Anyway, they talked about several things, including the availability of the Pi 4 and Pi 5. The 4 is basically available at this point everywhere, and the 5 they really see that they're kind of coming over the hump with that to where they'll just be available everywhere. They have some numbers in there about how many devices they're putting out per month, and it's just, I've ramped it up to some ridiculous numbers. And they're kind of anticipating they're going to ramp it up. They'll finally meet the need, and then they'll ramp it back down and not quite go balls to the wall the way that they have been on making them. And then the other link that I've got is actually off to the OpenWRT mailing list. John Crispin, one of the longtime devs, is actually putting together a project to build a piece of hardware called the OpenWRT-1. And it is going to be sort of like a single board computer, but designed specifically to be a router, designed to run OpenWRT. There's some cool stuff on here, and one of the things that I really like about it is their goal is to keep it under $100. So not unobtainium. There's been some people that have made some really impressive OpenWRT hardware, but it tends to get like the Turris Omnia, for example, some great hardware, but it's like $300 a piece, and so just the price keeps it out of most people's hands. So the OpenWRT-1 is something that I am watching very closely. Hoping to be able to talk to Crispin and some of the other guys about this at some point on Floss. But anyway, those are my 2 hardware stories. What do you guys think?
You said it was going to be about $300?
No. The Turris Omnia was the one that was over $300. And that is an incredible piece of hardware, but it's expensive. No, they're trying to keep the OpenWRT 1 under 100.
I wonder if the hardware is going to be similar to like what the Ubiquiti Edge, that little $50 router that they had. I don't know if they still have it or not. I wonder if you're looking at some little piece like that.
They've got some details here about what they're wanting to put into it. It was decent. So a MediaTek MT7981B for the CPU. 1 gig of DRAM, which is a bunch for OpenWRT. 128 meg of NAND, which is also a bunch. They're looking at 2 Ethernets, one at 2.5 gig and one at 1 gig. Some USB 2 on there. A couple of their interesting things. I think at some point they're talking about putting, I think I saw where they're going to be putting an NVMe slot on it as well. So some neat things.
Is that a wired only, or is there wireless in there?
I think they're looking at doing wireless as well.
I would think so, since they've got that MediaTek MT7976C for Wi-Fi.
Yes, it's supposed to have Wi-Fi built in.
No, that's more than the Edge router had.
Yes. Well, I mean, Ubiquiti also makes access points. They wanted to be able to still sell their access points, I'm sure. I'm trying to find the details on that CPU, and I am not immediately seeing anything. But it'll be enough. That might be a dual core. I don't know. I've not the internet is not immediately telling me about the CPU. So, oh well.
I'm not in the market, but that being much easier way to get OpenWRT or OpenWRT than Flash and your old TP-Link or whatever.
Right. Now the only disadvantage is that you could get in the old days. This is not necessarily true anymore, but there for a while you could get really decent TP-Link hardware that would run OpenWRT just great for like $20 a piece.
Yeah, they got some cheap ones.
But they worked. They worked great. And there are still some options out there, but the problem that I kept running into trying to do that for people was, TP-Link would bump their version numbers, their hardware revisions, that is. And so, they would, what would happen is they would order 10,000 of these chips and they would do a run, and then they would sell out of those. And then they would go to order the next batch of chips, and that particular, it could be the SPI memory, the actual flash memory on the board. That particular SPI flash isn't available. We have to get one that's slightly different. Well, if we get something that's different, then we have to re-rev the whole board. And so you would end up with a couple of little changes like that between the versions. And of course, every time that happened, somebody had to come along and port OpenWRT to the new version of it. And it got to be a pain. So all that to say, the OpenWRT 1 really intrigues me because the price point is decent. It's a decent for, somebody like me or Rob that does kind of pro network support for businesses. You could buy that. You maybe 3D print a case. I think they're talking about having an official case for it too.
It's just a board right now. They're talking.
The hardware design at this point is just a board. I've seen some conversation about the case.
It's got in their case, PCB size is compatible to BPI-R4, and the case design can be reused.
Aha. So they're essentially reusing somebody else's footprint, which that'll make that easier. There'll be options for the case.
There'll probably be STL files for the case.
Yeah, probably. Well,
if you don't print it yourself, that's going to bring up the cost just a little bit more, unless you want to put it into a cardboard box.
I may or may not have done that with a couple of these SBCs over the years.
Or they go the route of the Raspberry Pi and just let you buy the components and get the instructions from them on putting it together.
Yeah.
In addition to offering you the option of paying for them to put in the labor.
I think the price point here might actually make sense for some of us to buy these in bulk and be able to offer it as a product, which I think is pretty fascinating to get really good OpenWRT hardware in various businesses.
I really need to play with OpenWRT one of these days. I've never touched it. I've looked at it and thought about it for years, and
so my wife says in the chat that she recalls the Legos coming out at one point for making a makeshift box for some piece of hardware. And yes, that does sound familiar now that you mention it. There's a couple of companies that have embraced that. So I've got a little tiny keyboard. This guy is actually the M5 stack. And one of the interesting things about it is it's got this little hole punched in the top corner of it. And according to their documentation, it's a little tiny keyboard, but according to their documentation, that hole is Lego compatible. So you've got some companies that have absolutely bought into that idea of build your own case, use Legos, it'll be great.
That's awesome. So what? You could put that little hole somewhere and swivel it out or something.
There's all kinds of ways that you could use that. Yep, all kinds of ways. You can go the Lego Technic route and make it all fold and unfold, or just use your old school Legos. I mean,
when I run out of projects, I'm breaking out my Legos again.
What I like is the fact that it sounds like they want to try to make it essentially unbrickable with two different flash chips.
Yeah, there is some work on doing that, because various devices are various levels of brickable. And when you get into embedded stuff like routers, some of them are difficult to bring back, especially if you manage to overwrite your U-boot, which is kind of the bootloader a lot of these use. If you try to update that and that breaks, well, sometimes you have a brick device, unless, of course, you have JTAG. And, you can get the cheap, let's see, I've got one here somewhere. Anyway, you can get the super cheap JTAG from Amazon or eBay, and that's technically not legal, but it's not on the consumer; it's on the Chinese company that's making it. Or you can pay $1,000 for one of the more legitimate JTAG programmers, but that's kind of a high bar to ask people to clear to be able to unbrick one of these. So I like the fact that they're trying to make that a little bit better. Get closer to the modern embedded stuff, the Android phone style of good luck bricking this. It's basically impossible.
Well, if you put in Legos are always brickable. Thanks to Aaron.
But
comment.
All right, Rob, save us. Let's talk about Wayland.
All right. So, as longtime followers know, it wasn't long ago that I was a Wayland denier. But I am all in these days on Wayland. And with the new CVE vulnerabilities announced for x.org every few weeks, it's hard not to see the benefits of moving to Wayland. Now, I want to be clear, because I've had this question come up on various social media platforms. X has its security issues, but it still isn't anything compared to the number of security vulnerabilities discovered in Windows each year. So I just want to be clear that when I say X has its issues, that doesn't mean stay on Windows until you're ready for Wayland or something.
Mm-hmm.
But moving along. So, for example, in 2013, a security researcher called the x.org server security state, quote, worse than it looks, and quite a disaster from the security bug perspective for the aging code base. I'm often telling people, like, various distros that don't support, I'll be nice and I won't name them, that don't support Wayland, is like, it's old code and you can't support the new features, HDR coming, high DPI as well. But anyway, all that said, why aren't you on Wayland yet? This week, 6 more CVE vulnerabilities are patched in x.org and xWayland, which is, for those who don't remember, xWayland is the xshim to get X-only apps working in Wayland. Once those apps are ported, eventually that can go away. So these CVE vulnerabilities, these include buffer overflows, out-of-bounds memory access, and local privilege escalations. Another advisory warns of SE Linux context corruption and SE Linux unlabeled GLX P buffer issues. I'm not going to dig too deep into that because that probably get boring, but if you're really interested, you could find links and check out those CVEs if you really wanted the hardcore details. So for those of you, if you are still stuck on X or using X Wayland for X apps, I guess like a lot of people are on Wayland, it's a good idea to patch. One more line from the article that matches my own sentiment these days is that I may have to use, quote, "It would be highly recommended to use Wayland instead. Linux distribution maintainers are also advised to switch to Wayland by default in their systems if they haven't done so." So if you're on X, there's reasons to still be on X. Just keep your stuff up to date. But if you can, Wayland's the future, embrace it, and help bring that future to fruition.
So there is yet another story of security vulnerabilities in X11. One of them was around for 35 years. And I've got a link to this too. It's the JFrog link. And one of the things that blew my mind in this story is there is an image format, the XPM image format, and they start describing it. And so it was used for pixel data, like icons and some text, things like that. And this image format is written in C, not the client to read it, not the library. No, the images themselves were written in C. It was written it was put together in a very different time. Like, that is sort of just a great snapshot of why people are moving away from X to Wayland. It is so old. The icons themselves were defined in C code.
It's a great reason why you just need to wipe it away and start fresh. And to be fair, okay, somebody called this out to me when I call modern. Wayland has been in development for over a decade, but I don't remember what it was, late 2000s, I want to say. But still, the truth, I mean, that's still decades after X was originally released, and still, it supports more modern display features too.
Yeah, Aaron points out that he has to be able to use some remote access solutions for work stuff, and that in the GNOME session, like in Fedora 40 and some of the other distros that are about to come out with new releases, are promising to fix that. And so, there are a few of those pain points still where you've got to have some sort of native X, but it's getting closer and closer. So,
you know what I say to that? If work makes you do it, don't work.
Oh, I'm not sure I would say that. It's kind of nice to eat, but
that's what I always say.
Yeah,
I always say it. Don't work.
So, with that pearl of wisdom out of the way, Ken, let's talk about MX Linux. Is this MX Linux? AV Linux? What is this?
AV Linux MX Edition 23.1. And yes, that's a mouthful.
It is.
Now, what exactly is AV Linux? Well, according to Bobby Borisov, it's a versatile MX Linux-based distribution designed explicitly for audio and video production. AV Linux may be for you if you want a ready-to-use, comprehensive suite of multimedia tools without the hassle of individual installations and configurations. AV Linux comes with a wide range of pre-installed audio and video applications catering to the needs of musicians, sound engineers, video editors, and media creators. The latest release boasts an array of system highlights, including Liquorix Kernel 6.8, known for its low latency and the choice of Systemd or Systemd once installed. Linux 23.1 Enlightened is built on MX-23 or Debian 12 Bookworm and switches to the Enlightenment desktop environment in its 0.25.4 version to offer a sleek, user-friendly interface. At the same time, the introduction of Pipewire revolutionizes the audio system. AV Linux 23.1 is a powerhouse of creativity, starting with Ardour 8.2.5 for audio production, Audacity 3.4.0 for audio editing, and Blender 4.0.2 for 3D modeling and animation. Video editors will also appreciate the inclusion of Kdenlive 23.08.4 and OpenWRT 3.1.1, while music composers can delve into MuseScore 4 and Hydrogen 1.2.0. If you are looking for a high-end audio mixing and mastering experience, check out the Harrison Mixbus 32C 9.2.172 demo version.
Mm-hmm.
AV Linux 23.1 also ensures a wide array of sound customization options for users through over 1,000 FLOSS and commercial demo audio plugins. Bobby's article includes links to the release and Glenn MacArthur's 87-minute video tutorial.
That last bit there is actually pretty impressive. The 87-minute video tutorial. That's quite some documentation. Assuming that it's done well. Hopefully it is.
I've still got to finish watching it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never tried the Licorice kernel. I've heard about it. I know some people really like it. I don't know. I guess I've never really run into the problems that it's trying to solve. The closest thing I've ever used to that is the Nobara kernel. I think maybe pulls in some of those same patches.
Yeah. Adrian and that team over at MX seem to be doing a lot of interesting things that people sure love.
Yeah, I'm hearing
it's a different way.
I'm hearing more and more about MX Linux. We'll see if it will continue and come to be one of the more popular distros out there.
Yeah, it's definitely a different way. I know in some groups it is popular. I hear about it a lot on some of the Linux groups I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
maybe not, popular like 50% of the Linux market, but there's
yeah, we'll see. All right, so 6.8. 6.8 is coming probably tomorrow. So very possibly by the time that you get to listen to this episode, we will have the RC1 of 6.8, Linux kernel 6.8, which really just means the end of the merge window. Now, we speculated that we might get an extra week of merge window because of some winter weather here in the United States, and particularly up in the Portland area where Torvalds lives, because he was without power, and he is sort of the guy when it comes to making merge requests and making things happen. But it was not out long enough. Power was not out long enough for us to get an extra week of merges, but there is some neat stuff in the 6.8 kernel. The XFS file system is getting it better and better with online repair. I believe that got added in 6.6. Some changes happened in 6.7 and some more in 6.8, but it's getting to be more and more useful. Online repair is a pretty interesting concept. Makes it a lot easier to get those sorts of file system repairs done on the fly without having to dig out another boot disk or boot from your emergency mode, what have you. And then there are some Asahi patches where, M1 and M2 powered machines, that's things like USB and Thunderbolt support fixes landing for those. And then there were a couple of interesting things in the DRM pull. The Imagination driver is finally landing in mainstream Linux in 6.8. And Imagination is pretty fascinating. Now, it is currently limited. It is currently quite limited what actual devices are supported with that. But the reason that that's really fascinating to me is because you've got RISC-V boards. And Imagination has made a play to try to convince these guys making RISC-V chips to put these Imagination Power VR GPU cores in them. And so you have little boards like the Star5 2 has an Imagination GPU core. Well, as you can imagine, it would be, no pun intended there, as you can imagine, it will be really nice when we get to the point to where those boards run on mainline Linux with that driver. And then another big video card driver landed. That is Intel's XE. Not sure how they pronounce it, but the XE driver, which is sort of Intel's next generation video card driver for Linux. That has its initial land has happened. And then the other thing that I am particularly interested in is AMD's color management stuff. And that is essentially support. This is oversimplifying it, but that is essentially support for the Steam Deck HDR, the OLED Steam Deck. That is how that is related to getting HDR working there. The neat thing for the rest of us, though, is that may also help in getting HDR working in games on the rest of our desktops if you happen to have an HDR display. So some fun stuff in the kernel this time around. Not earth-shattering like some that we've had, but some good stuff in there.
You know, I'm glad you explained that online repair with XFS, because for the longest time, while you're talking about it, I was thinking it had something to do with like online as in the internet. I was like, what is it? Reach out and get new information? I'm like, how does that help it?
Not that kind of online.
Online as in the file system can remain online while it gets fixed.
Yeah, no, it can be fixed while mounted is the simple way to put that.
Yeah, you know, unlike the Windows online repair, which I don't know. Can't be fixed.
Instead of having to unmount it before you run a FSCK.
Right. Which, if it happens to be your root or your home partitions, you know, there isn't any way to unmount it. You get to reboot and boot off of a different boot drive. That's it. That's your only option. So online repair can be really useful.
That's why you keep a live CD around.
Yes. Or a USB drive with Ventoy on it.
CD? I mean, the problem there is who has a CD drive anymore? Come on, guy.
as opposed to the DVD drive?
Yeah, there we go. Even that.
I mean, so I don't know if you know this, Rob, but pretty much all of your DVD and Blu-ray drives will also play CDs.
I don't have DVD. I don't have optical drives in my computers.
Oh,
most of them.
So I do. I will tell you pretty much the one reason why I do. I guess two reasons. Burning ISOs is one of them, to be able to do boot drives. Although Ventoy is kind of taking that away. It's becoming less and less of a thing because
even without Ventoy, you can burn them to a USB drive. So.
I do not like doing that. I have never liked the idea of doing that. Ventoy makes it a lot better. But the reason I've got optical drives is because I actually like to own some media. And so rather than just watching things through Netflix or Disney Plus or whatever, it's kind of nice to actually buy and be able to hold in my hands the DVD. It's like, this is mine. You can't take it from me.
You only need one drive. You put the DVD in there once and you handbrake it to your media center and you don't ever need it again.
Yeah. Put it on the shelf in case you ever crash your media center and lose it.
I have an external USB optical drive available to me if I need it.
The optical's available.
I'd have to stop and count how many optical drives I still have around. For some reason, I've held on to them.
You know, I'm somehow not surprised by that.
And some of those older ones actually work better than the newer ones.
Yeah, well, that's true. I grant you that. All right, Rob, let's talk about something else really fun that just happened. What's up with Wine 9?
Yeah, so I guess Wine may have been one of those reasons to keep X around also. But even Wine developers see the importance of moving to Wayland. Maybe a little later than some, but earlier than others. But, they're running Windows apps anyway, so security really isn't a concern for them because it's Windows apps. So this week, Wine 9 has been released, and the big new feature is the new experimental Wayland graphics driver with features like basic window management, support for multiple monitors, high DPI scaling, relative motion events, as well as Vulkan support. But the Wayland driver isn't enabled by default. So if you want to try it out, you're going to need to edit some registries. I'm not going to tell you how to do that because it's a long strings of text and slashes and stuff. But if you want to do it, you can find the show notes and it'll tell you how to do it.
I imagine too that stuff like that registry hack will make it into Wine Tricks before too long too.
Oh, sure.
Wine Tricks, probably Lutris will get an option for it. There's going to be other ways to get to it rather than diving into the Windows registry on Linux. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I read that. I'm like, wow, that's the funniest thing ever. I suppose the Windows registry has to tell it where the display server is.
Yup. Wine is a weird beast, man.
Yeah. So, Wine 9, it also adds some more DirectX 10 effects, instructions, and improving media and video handling. Some desktop integrations has been improved, some initial ARM support, along with many other things under the hood. But mostly, your standard updates and improvements, with Wayland being the big addition to it, at least the experimental.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though you probably won't improve the security much since you're already running Windows apps, you will gain some of the modern display benefits of Wayland, such as high DPI and probably HDR soon once that's ready. So it's an incremental step, but it's a big step.
So there's a couple of things to note here. One, while it's fun that the .0 release of Wine is considered stable, and then the .1 and continuing is they're unstable. While the stable releases are fun, hardly anybody, especially gamers, don't particularly run those. And it'll almost be more exciting to see what lands in the 9.1 release, because you kind of get work that gets backed up because they do have a sort of like a merge window. They have a feature freeze because they would like 9.0 to be somewhat stable. So you get more experimental, more bleeding edge work that backs up. And so 9.1 may just have a bunch of cool stuff in it. But then the other side of that is, how many people actually run vanilla Wine anymore? Seems like probably not very many, because some distros have gone to just packaging and shipping Wine staging, which is sort of the Wine test branch. But goodness, when I go to run any games, I'm going to run them on Proton because it's got so many more fixes. I know. Games is not the only thing you do with Wine, but still, man, I do almost everything in Proton. And yes, Valve is good about pushing all that stuff into Wine, but still, I hardly ever use vanilla Wine.
Yeah, it's not really for gaming these days, but some people want to run their MS Office 2016 or whatever.
Yeah, I suppose.
Well, the good news is you've got that WoW 64 that's going to be enabled, especially for Macs.
Yeah, I know there's
Windows on Windows 64.
Right, and that is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Because that may help.
You go ahead.
That may help you, Jonathan, with that old it Intuit?
It's Quicken Home and Business from like a long time ago. It's one of the applications that I run on Wine.
2010.
something like, I think it's 2007. It's old. It's really old, but it works. So. The WoW 64 mode, that will be interesting. Particularly because we're starting to see a movement in Linux itself to do away with all the 32-bit stuff. So I imagine they're looking forward to that and kind of thinking, oh, well, what's the game plan going to be? There's some interesting stuff here. I kind of wonder whether the wine on Windows idea is ever going to come back. I know this is something that they talked about once upon a time, because you have a bunch of old Windows apps that don't run on Windows anymore. So one of the things people suggested is, well, couldn't you just run wine on Windows to make the old apps work?
Is that on the Windows subsystem for Linux or straight on Windows?
Straight on Windows. I guess one of the ways to do that these days would be to run wine on WSL, probably WSL2.
Yeah, it's already there. They're not going to bother porting it when they already have an option.
Yeah, maybe that's the way to do it.
I should try that. You know, when you're talking earlier, about 9.0 being the stable and the exciting stuff coming in like 9.1. That being said, it is kind of interesting that they put an experimental feature in 9.0.
Yeah,
not enabled, but there.
I think that had more to do with just the way the schedule is lined up. I don't think that was my feeling on it. Is it wasn't necessarily an intentional decision that they wanted that to be a 9.0. I kind of feel like that's just the way it landed. And the fact that it's off by default sort of backs that idea up. You get a couple of more releases, you get to maybe 9.2, 9.3, and that'll really start to be more interesting and usable. Yeah. And then so you do have this with some features. We talked about that idea of everybody uses Proton. Well, one of the interesting things is Proton tends to lag behind upstream Wine in release version. So I'd have to look. You've got the latest Proton. It's going to be based on some Wine version that's usually several versions back. And so you have these features that maybe Valve doesn't necessarily care about, that the rest of us would. And so there is kind of this little bit of back and forth where it's like, well, sometimes you have to wait for the next version of Proton to come out because it'll then catch up to the latest version of Wine. And there's some fix that maybe makes more sense on the desktops than it does on the rest of Valve stuff. There's a bit of give and take there. Let's see. So Proton is currently on 8.0.4, which is it doesn't say. It doesn't say what Wine version it's based on. But I don't know if I can quickly find it. It'll be here somewhere. Wine. And do we have a Wine version 8.0? Okay. So it looks like Proton tends to track the major releases of Wine. Proton 8 is Wine 8. So it'll be very interesting to see. Are we going to get a Proton 9 that tracks Wine 9 here in the next few days to weeks?
I'd say 2 months.
Yeah, and sometimes they make them available earlier as Proton experimental builds, and then you have, because this ecosystem is huge, you have things like the Glorious Egg Roll builds, where that takes all of the Proton patches and some of the Wine staging patches and rebases all of them on top of the latest upstream Wine. And so, you've got the options there, and sometimes games will work using that and nothing else. It's quite a tangled jungle sometimes of all these different releases and how they fit together.
Too complicated for me.
I mean, it just depends. Just depends upon what game you've got and how badly you want it to work. How badly do you want this particular feature?
Your wife says glorious egg roll, geeks and their foods. I do like egg rolls.
Geeks and their foods. We have a thing for it. All right. Ken, what if we don't want to use Wine? Is there another option out there? Did somebody just make a release?
Well, you could go with one of the many virtual machines out there for running your favorite version of Windows. But Marius Nestor, writing for 9 to 5 Linux, tells us about the latest update to VirtualBox. It's going to be version 7.0.14. This maintenance release introduces the ability to import and export virtual machines containing NVMe storage controllers, initial support for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9.4's kernel, and support for exporting virtual machines containing a medium inserted into a virtual CD or DVD drive that's attached to a VirtIO-SCSI controller. VirtualBox 7.0.14 also fixes various bugs, including, no, we're not talking about a panic at the disco, it's a kernel panic on the Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.9 kernel caused by the VBox Video in Linux Guest Edition and a memory leak in the VBox Int.net switch process when a virtual machine was configured to use internal networking on Mac OS hosts. In addition, it addresses a problem where Windows guests no longer remember in-progress touch events when the user holds down a finger without moving it for a period of time. I'm assuming they're talking about a touch screen here. For Solaris guest editions, this release introduces support for installation into an alternate root path and removes the requirement to reboot a virtual machine after uninstalling the guest edition. Marius' article gives even more details and includes a link to the full changelog. I wish Jeff was here so I could ask him if he'd be updating to VirtualBox 7.0.14 for this tax season.
Yeah, would be interesting. I know I use VirtualBox. I used to use VirtualBox, some of my first forays into virtualization, but I've, for the longest time, just been satisfied with libvirt. Because, of course, I run Linux everywhere, so I don't have to have virtualization on Windows or on Mac. But yeah, it's neat to see them continue to push VirtualBox forwards. Now, who is it that makes VirtualBox? Is that an Oracle product?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't like to touch it.
Is this one of those deals where Oracle forgot that they have VirtualBox and that's why it's still decent?
Yes.
Yeah.
Keep quiet about that.
Yeah, don't tell anybody.
If I were Jeff, though, I'd wait to update until after tax season. Probably not before.
Yeah.
Even though it'll probably be fine, you don't want to mess with taxes. Yeah, but anyway, like Jonathan, I've pretty much been a libvirt kind of person. Even in the rare case when I'm on Windows, then I just use Hyper-V. But still, libvirt's kind of been my use case. Though this week, I have a big project plan. My KVM, QEMU, libvirt server that you guys have seen on the show, I plan to migrate to Proxmox when my new hardware comes on Tuesday. So I haven't even tried it yet. I looked into it, and I think I'm going to enjoy Proxmox. So when my new stuff comes, I may have some things to talk about next week on that for the virtualization side.
Does Proxmox support Reiser FS?
That's an interesting segue. Probably not, because not very many places, not much supports Reiser FS anymore. So there is a story here. I hear grumbling in the background. So the man behind Reiser FS, Hans Reiser, has been in jail for close to 20 years now, and it's from the murder of his wife back in 2006, when he was in the midst of working on Reiser FS, a file system for Linux. And part of the story here is that Reiser FS 3 was in the kernel and recently got removed from it. Just because the code was old and cranky and there wasn't really anybody doing proper maintenance on it, and it was getting to be a problem and hardly anyone was using it. And one of the kernel devs actually wrote. So it was Frederick R. Brennan is the name of the fellow that did this. He actually wrote to Hans Reiser in prison and asked him if he had any thoughts on it, if he wanted to reply. And it's quite a long letter that Hans sent from prison. And there's some really interesting things in here, actually. He talks about a lot of regrets. He talks about some regrets in how he managed people. Apparently, he had a small company put together around the idea of the Reiser file system. And just some of the missteps that he made. And he encouraged people, to try to find help earlier than he did, and made some statements about wishing he had known then what he knows now and all of that. But there's some pretty fascinating stuff in there, because his understanding of the internet and the world is sort of like a snapshot of 2006. So he's like, the Linux kernel mailing list and /dot seem like great places to send this. It's like, well, okay, it makes sense, I guess, from 2006. There's some real interesting stuff there. So if you have some time and want to sort of get a snapshot of what this situation looks like and some of the politics of kernel development from 2006 and all of that, that letter is available both in OCR form as well as original scans of that letter. Some interesting kernel lore, sort of dark kernel lore in some ways, but fascinating, interesting stuff.
Yeah, I have nothing to add, but I saw that story and I thought that was interesting too. I'm glad you picked that up.
Yeah, I thought it'd be worth pointing out and pointing people to. All right, let's get into some tips. Rob, what is this Systemd madness?
All right, so my tip is Systemd-nspawn. So let me just get this ready over here for those watching. Kind of caught me. I wasn't quite prepared. Why wasn't I? It's like tips. That you just jumped to that so quick. All right, so for those watching, I'm going to quick run through this, but so Systemd-nspawn, it's a quick way to get a Linux container running. So uname -a, you can see I'm running the Zen kernel. It's Arch. You can't, I guess, really see that from my uname -a, but I'm going to run pacman-h to show you that, hey, I have pacman installed, so it's at least an Arch derivative. So here you got, for those watching, I have a file I already installed this called deb-bootstrap. So there's, you can do this with Fedora, Debian, Ubuntu, Arch, of course. So these are just the bootstraps to create a base of the system. So for those watching, you can see I'm running a bootstrap. I'm not going to do the whole contents of that. You can look at the show notes if you decide to do a Debian and want to figure out how to do that. But I am doing a bootstrap into a stable, or not stable, Debian folder that I have on this in this directory there. So if I do that, it's going to download and install all of Ubuntu. So since I've already done this once, it's going to be pretty quick there. So then after I get that base there, ls, there's my Debian folder. So now I'm going to run Systemd-nspawn with the -d, and that's just going to chroot me into Debian. So now that I'm in that Debian folder, I'm setting a password for the root user, because you have to do that. You have to have a password on the root user when you boot up to be able to do anything. So after I've done that, I'm going to exit out of, I'm going to exit out, and then I am going to run the Systemd-nspawn with -b to boot, and then -d for a chroot, and it boots up Debian. Now I'm going to log in here as root, and after I log in, clear this out. I'm going to do apt --help.
Whoops.
So that way you can see now I have app. So I'm running on Arch. I'm in a container that I quickly set up, and I have app. Now on here, I could apt install Apache 2. And with that, if I do that, I'm going to have a really quick Apache container that I set up here from scratch in 2 minutes. And now I have an Apache container that I can utilize. So it's maybe not the most robust container system, but if you just want to set up something really quick on your system, it's already built in. If you have a Systemd system, it's already built in the Systemd. You don't even have to install Systemd-nspawn. It's part of it. And you can quickly spin it up. I haven't been able to get a GUI application to work yet. I need to point it to a display server, which I'm sure you can do it, but I haven't done that yet. I've done some web browsers. I set up a Pi-hole in one of these once just to see. So a quick way to spin up a container.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting. I've got a development project that might do really well with that. So good to know. Ken, you too, it looks like, have a Systemd esque command line tip here. I feel like I was left out of the loop and I have something totally different. That's fine. Ken, take it away.
Yeah, we've discussed using systemctl for starting, stopping, and restarting services. Today, I want to discuss enabling, disabling, masking, or unmasking service. Basically, the commands are systemctl enable. That allows your services to start on system boot. If you do systemctl disable, this will disable your service, and other services or dependencies are using it. They can still start the service on system boot. However, if you want to make sure they don't start, then you want to mask. So it'd be systemctl mask. That way, no matter what services or dependencies might require that particular service, it will not start manually or on the system boot. Now, the way this is done is with the help of symlinks or symbolic links, as we've talked in the past. These are basically links that you can either manually create or created by the system to point to the location of a particular file. So with the services is enabled because there's a symbolic link at from root etc/systemd/system path to the unit file located at the from root lib/systemd/system path. The system disable command will remove the symbolic link, leaving your original unit file, but the service will not be able to load on the next boot when systemd reads the etc/systemd system path. The systemctl mask command, however, will actually point that symlink so it goes to the dev null file, which makes it impossible to start that service on the system boot or manually by you, even if it was required by another service or dependency. Hopefully you'll find that these commands may come in handy when you're trying to troubleshoot problems with some of your services on your system.
Yep. So I am in the habit of doing a systemd-ctl start and then also an enable. Aaron points out that you can actually just do systemd enable --now and then the service, and it will both enable it and start it right away. I believe you can do the same with a disable with the -now flag. So that one is pretty cool. And then I'm also your mention of dev null. I don't know that we've ever gone into great detail about some of those special files in /dev, like null, 0, random, urandom, some of those interesting ones there. So maybe we'll have to do that, come back next week and talk about dev null and some of the others.
thought Jeff had covered that when he went through all the file system.
He may have done some of them, of maybe a good portion of them. We will have to go back and look.
No, that's Jeff's hacker name.
So I've got a command line tip too. This is one I have been using while again working with the HDR stuff. And we've talked about yt-dlp in the past. There is another command that's sort of more up to date these days, and that is yt-dlp. And it is the YouTube downloader. And of course, it supports other sites as well, but primarily for YouTube. It is a fork of yt-dlp. But yt-dlp is sort of where the community has gone. It's the one that is more up to date. In fact, I think the old YouTube DL is now abandoned, if I remember correctly. I tend to use yt-dlp with the -F flag, and that will then list out the media types that are available. Because again, I am looking to grab HDR content, and that will very quickly, it'll download the web page and then download the available list of media files. And it'll very quickly tell you whether or not there is an HDR file. And then you use something like -f. So the whole command looks like yt-dlp space, and then the YouTube link that you want to grab, space, then -f to tell it the formats that you want. And you end up doing something like, and these numbers are off the top of my head, but it's something like 223 plus 337 is what I've been using. And so that'll be an audio format plus a video format. It'll download both of those, and then it'll use FFmpeg if it's installed to put them together into one file. So super useful for doing archive stuff. And if you have a YouTube file that your browser doesn't want to play, like in my case, because it's HDR. So I know we've talked about the old one, wanted to let folks know where the new version of that is at. All right. Do we have any closing comments? We will start with Rob. What do you want to end the show with? Plug, what have you?
Just my usual. Come find me. Connect at robertpcampbell.com. On there, you can find links if you want to donate a coffee to me. Connect with me on Mastodon, or connect with me on LinkedIn for more formal businessy type of discussions.
All right. And Ken?
Yes. While I was looking through all the news that was out this week, I came across Adafruit's latest blog post about developer Roy Longbottom's comparison between the 1976 Cray 1 supercomputer and the original Raspberry Pi Model B. Now, I've got a link in the show notes that has a link to a Hackster IO's article, as well as Roy's site containing comparisons to other home computers, phones, and tablets. I can see some of us spending a day just looking at all the comparisons.
Fun. All right. So I will make sure and plug Hackaday. We've got my security column goes live every Friday morning, and then we've got Floss Weekly over there on Wednesdays. So check those out. And then one thing else that I will mention, I've got a buddy who is a C++ programmer, does a lot with Android system development, great Linux sysadmin. If you're looking for someone with that particular skill set, hit me up. He is out of work and getting a little worried about finding something. So wanted to mention that for him. Hit me up if you need a sysadmin or an Android guy, or just somebody that knows his way around C++. With that, I want to say thank you. Thank you to my co-hosts for being here. Thank you for those of you in the live chat. We have like 14 people watching live today. That is great. And I know a bunch more than that on the download. We appreciate each and every one of you. And hey, we will see you next week on the Untitled Linux Show.